The Cursed Portrait in the Attic, a tale of vengeance that lingers through generations. The old Hawthorne estate loomed over the countryside like a forgotten monument to sorrow. Locals whispered about the strange happenings that plagued anyone who lived there, and no one dared venture near after sunset. But for Eliza Hawthorne, it was home, albeit a crumbling one filled with shadows and silence. After her father's sudden death, Eliza returned to the estate to settle his affairs. The house had been in the family for generations, and despite its fading grandeur, something about it always unnerved her. It wasn't just the creaking floorboards or the way the cold seemed to settle into her bones, it was the attic. From childhood, she'd been warned never to go up there, old things best left forgotten, her father once muttered, but grief, mixed with curiosity, has a way of unsealing doors. On a stormy autumn evening, Eliza ascended the narrow staircase with a lantern in hand. The attic was a time capsule of dust and decay, antique furniture, rotting trunks, and cobwebbed heirlooms. But what caught her eye was a massive, covered canvas leaning against the far wall. As if compelled, Eliza pulled the sheet away. The portrait was of a woman, young, beautiful, but with eyes that held a fury so intense it seemed to pierce through the canvas. Her name was Arabella Hawthorne, an ancestor whispered about in family legend. She'd been accused of witchcraft and betrayal in the late 1700s, locked away by her own family after she defied the patriarch's cruel decisions. She died in that very attic. So the story went, cursing every generation that would follow. Suddenly, the temperature dropped. Eliza's lantern flickered and went out. That night, the dreams began. Eliza saw Arabella standing beside her bed, whispering forgotten names and demanding justice. Furniture moved on its own. Clocks stopped at 3:17 a.m., the exact time Arabella was said to have died. Desperate, Eliza dug into the family records and diaries. The truth was darker than she imagined. Arabella hadn't betrayed the family, she had tried to save it. Her warnings about a business deal had been ignored, and as a result, dozens died in a mining collapse. For speaking out, she was labeled mad and sealed away by her brother, the same man Eliza's father idolized. The curse wasn't just a story. Each generation suffered mysterious deaths, madness, and misfortune. The portrait was the anchor, a vessel holding Arabella's wrath. Eliza decided to confront her. On the seventh night, at 3:17 a.m., she returned to the attic with the portrait. She lit candles and read aloud the truth she'd uncovered, offering Arabella recognition and the justice she was denied. At first, the house shook, winds howled through sealed windows, and the portrait's eyes glowed red. But as Eliza finished, the air grew still. The portrait's colors began to fade, the woman's expression softening into sorrow before finally dissolving into ash. Eliza collapsed, breathless. Morning light streamed through the attic window for the first time in decades. Though the estate remained old and creaky, the weight was gone. Eliza stayed, restoring the home and breaking the silence that once ruled it. But she kept the attic locked, just in case. Because vengeance may rest, but it never truly forgets. Would you like this adapted into a script, audio version, or something else? Here's what happens next in the story, a continuation titled The Cursed Portrait in the Attic, Part 2, Echoes in the Floorboards. Months passed, and the Hawthorne estate breathed again. Eliza worked tirelessly to restore its halls, turning decay into dignity. The town, once wary, began to take notice. People visited, curious to see the woman who lifted the curse. But peace, Eliza would soon learn, was only a surface illusion. It began subtly, barely their whispers when she passed mirrors, shadows that didn't match her movement. The attic remained locked, and Eliza never dared open it again. Still, something new stirred, something that didn't feel like Arabella. One night, while renovating the library, she discovered a hidden compartment behind the fireplace. Inside was a brittle leather journal, Jonas Hawthorne, the brother who betrayed Arabella. His final entries were wild, rambling things, filled with talk of a second spirit, a darkness Arabella had tried to contain, not just avenge. He had known about it. According to Jonas, before her death, Arabella tried to trap not just her grief but something else in the portrait, something older, feeding on guilt and bloodlines. When Eliza burned the painting, she may have freed Arabella's soul, but released what had been imprisoned behind it. The nightmares returned, worse than before. This time, it wasn't Arabella's eyes she saw in the dark, it was a faceless thing, whispering in a voice that sounded like her own. The floorboards began bleeding tar. The house's walls pulsed like lungs. One morning, Eliza found a new painting hanging in the parlor. She hadn't placed it there. It showed her, standing in the attic, her face half-shadowed, eyes lifeless. At the bottom was a name, freshly signed. The Watcher. And underneath it, scratched in the paint with a nail, "You freed me. Would you like me to continue the story into a third part, or adapt this into a longer novella format?" Absolutely. Here's the continuation. The Cursed Portrait in the Attic, Part 3, The Watcher's Game. Eliza tried to destroy the new painting. She burned it in the hearth, just as she had with Arabella's portrait, but the canvas refused to char. The flames danced around it, mocking her, until she yanked it from the fire in panic. Not a single scorch mark. That night, she awoke to the sound of someone pacing upstairs, slow, deliberate footsteps above her bedroom, the attic, but the door was still locked. The next morning, Eliza found it standing wide open. Inside, where the ashes of Arabella's portrait should have remained, there was only a dark, circular stain on the floor, still wet, still pulsing. As she approached, she felt a presence behind her. Turning quickly, she saw nothing, but the air had changed, heavier, expectant. She fled. In desperation, Eliza contacted Dr. Evelyn Morin, an expert in folklore and supernatural history. Evelyn arrived days later, with tools, symbols, and grim expressions. "There are things older than curses," she said after inspecting the attic. "You released a tethered entity, a parasite that used Arabella's pain to mask itself. It feeds on guilt, legacy, and attention." Eliza asked the obvious question, "What does it want?" Evelyn's voice was low. "To be remembered, and now, to be seen." That night, more portraits appeared, on the walls, in drawers, under floorboards. All of them showed Eliza in different stages of despair, surrounded by shadows. In one, she was screaming. In another, lifeless, hanging from the attic rafters. Evelyn and Eliza attempted a cleansing ritual, but midway through, the mirrors in the house shattered at once. The flames in their candles snuffed out, replaced by a cold, hissing breath. Evelyn collapsed, blood trickling from her ears. Before losing consciousness, she whispered one word, "Name it." Eliza scoured the journals again, searching for any hint of the Watcher's true name. Days passed, sleep-starved and hunted by her own home. Finally, buried in Arabella's childhood diary, she found it. The Rose. An old name, one whispered in nursery rhymes meant to scare children into obedience. "If you lie, if you cheat, the Rose will come with cloven feet." Eliza climbed to the attic at dusk. Surrounded by sultan sigils, she called the name aloud. Nothing. Then came a laugh, deep and crawling, like insects under skin. From the dark stain on the attic floor, a shape began to rise as tall, robed in dripping shadows. No face, only eyes. Hundreds, blinking, watching. "You see me now," it rasped, "and so shall others." Then it lunged. Would you like me to continue the story with Eliza's confrontation, or reveal more of the Watcher's origin? Certainly. Here's the next installment. The Cursed Portrait in the Attic, Part 4, Naming the Darkness. Eliza didn't scream as the thing lunged, she stood her ground, whispering the name again, "The Rose." It halted inches from her, seething, its mass writhed like smoke and flesh, trying to resist the pull of the name. A terrible sound, like weeping metal, filled the attic. "You do not understand what I am," it growled. But Eliza did. She had read the final passage in Arabella's diary, words written in panic, but with purpose. Arabella hadn't just hidden the Rose, she had learned how to bind it. Not destroy it, that was impossible, but confine it, in portrait and memory. The key was not just naming, it was witnessing and refusal. "You were a parasite," Eliza said, louder now. "You fed on suffering. You shaped our history to ensure you'd always be remembered in pain." The Rose howled, and the attic windows exploded. Below them, the house shuddered. Eliza stepped into the salt circle, lifting Arabella's diary in one hand, a brush in the other. Evelyn had said to reclaim legacy. That memory was the battlefield. She began to paint. On an old canvas she had dragged up from the cellar, Eliza painted Arabella, not in torment, but triumphant. her eyes calm, her arms outstretched toward a rising sun. With each stroke, the rose twisted and screamed, the attic warping around them. "You cannot rewrite what I have made," it bellowed. Eliza ignored it. She added the names of every hawthorn who had suffered unjustly. She painted their truths, hidden, twisted, erased. Then she painted herself. The last stroke was her own face, staring down the darkness. As the paint dried, the stain on the attic floor began to crack. The rose flailed, trying to possess the painting. But the new portrait wasn't made in pain, it was made in defiance. The eyes disappeared, the body crumbled. The rose shrieked one last time, then shattered into a fine, black dust that sank into the cracks of the attic floor and vanished. Weeks later, the house was calm. Evelyn recovered, though her hearing never returned. Eliza sealed the attic once again, but this time, not out of fear. It was no longer a prison. The new portrait hung in the main hall, where everyone could see it. Guests often asked who the woman in the painting was. Eliza simply smiled and said, "She's the one who remembered for all of us." But at night, when the house was quiet, she still left a candle lit. Because some darkness doesn't die. It waits for silence. Would you like an epilogue or a prequel exploring Arabella's life before the curse? Absolutely. Here's the epilogue to conclude the tale. Epilogue: The Candle and the Silence. Years passed, and the Hawthorne estate transformed into a quiet refuge for artists, historians, and seekers of forgotten truths. Eliza remained its caretaker. Older now, her once dark hair streaked with silver, the portrait of Arabella stood in the grand hall, revered and untouched. People came to see it, not for its beauty, though it had plenty, but for the feeling it gave them, a quiet strength, a reminder that the past could be faced, and that not all ghosts were chains. But some evenings, after the guests had gone and the halls echoed with only the ticking of the old grandfather clock, Eliza still walked the house by candlelight. One such night, as wind howled outside and rain lashed the windows, she passed a mirror in the hallway. She stopped, looked closer. Her reflection was still, but the candle in its hand flickered the other way. A chill passed through her, slow and knowing. She turned sharply, but there was no one there, only the silence. She returned to the attic door. The seal was intact, the key still in her pocket. Yet inside, she heard it, a single, slow breath. Eliza placed her candle on the floor beside the door, just as she always did, and whispered, "I remember." The breath faded. The house grew quiet again. Because the thing about darkness is, it never fully dies. But as long as someone remembers the truth, it never fully wins either. The end. Would you like the entire story formatted as a printable PDF, or adapted into a screenplay or novel format? Certainly, since the main arc has concluded. Let's now explore the prequel, the origin of the curse and Arabella Hawthorne's final days. The Cursed Portrait in the Attic, Origins, Arabella's Silence. 1792, Hawthorne Estate was at its peak, a mansion of wealth, power, and secrets. The Hawthornes were admired by the townsfolk but feared for their ruthlessness, none more than Jonas Hawthorne, the family patriarch, charming in public, cruel in private. His younger sister, Arabella, was different. She was brilliant, outspoken, and gifted, though some whispered that she dabbled in forbidden knowledge, herbs that healed too well, dreams that predicted storms, and a voice that soothed dying men into peace. When Arabella uncovered her brother's latest secret, a mining deal built on faulty tunnels and unsafe labor, she tried to stop him. She begged, threatened, and finally warned the town herself. Dozens listened. Jonas could not allow that. He turned the town against her, spinning tales of witchcraft and madness. "She speaks to the dead," he said. "She cursed my crops. She brought sickness to the mines." The town, hungry for a scapegoat, obeyed. One night, without trial or farewell, Arabella was taken upstairs and sealed in the attic. The windows boarded, the door locked, food slid beneath the crack. Jonas told guests she had fallen ill. But Arabella didn't die quietly. In the silence, she painted. Using charcoals and stolen oils, she created her final portrait, a self-image of rage and sorrow, infused with symbols and names, not a curse, but a prison. She bound something dark inside it, a thing that had fed on Hawthorne bloodlines for generations. Long before her, she bound it with her pain, her name, and her final breath. 3 days later, she died at precisely 3:17 a.m. Jonas claimed it was madness. He sealed the attic for good. But in the years to follow, the Hawthorne family began to fracture. Children were born with dead eyes. Wealth turned to ash. Every mirror in the house began to fog without reason. Every new heir would dream of a woman watching them from a locked door. And though Jonas lived to be old, he never again stepped near the attic. His journals ended with a single page, smeared in ink. "It's watching me." She wasn't the curse, she was the shield. Would you like me to continue exploring Arabella's earlier life or show how the town was complicit in her fall? Certainly. Here's the continuation of the prequel, focusing on the town's complicity and the rising darkness before Arabella's fall. The Cursed Portrait in the Attic, Origins, the Turning of the Town. Arabella had once loved the town of Elderbrook. She walked its cobbled streets freely, taught children to read by lantern light, healed the sick with tinctures when doctors failed. People brought her bread and flowers in thanks. The Hawthorns were feared, but Arabella was revered. Until the mines collapsed. 37 men and boys buried in the dark. The town mourned. Yes, but it wanted someone to blame. And Jonas, ever the strategist, offered them a perfect answer: Arabella. He stood in the town square, voice trembling with well-practiced sorrow. "She warned me, too late," he said. She knew, she saw it coming, but she said nothing. Or worse, she made it happen. Whispers spread like wildfire. She cursed the miners. Her mother was a midwife and a witch. "I saw her burn herbs on the full moon. Her eyes, they don't blink right." The town that once kissed her hand now barred its doors. Children stopped visiting her garden. Someone threw a dead raven onto her doorstep. Throat slit, eyes gouged out. But Arabella didn't flee. She fought. She stood in the square and screamed the truth, about the mine, about Jonas, about the ancient thing that whispered in the bloodlines of powerful families. She spoke of symbols carved into the mine supports that weren't for protection, but invitation. No one believed her. Or worse, some did. And still they let Jonas take her. Because it was easier to bury one voice than admit the rot ran through them all. The night she was dragged to the attic, she made no sound. But in her eyes burned a promise. That night, Elderbrook's skies darkened. A storm hit harder than any in decades. Crops died. Milk curdled in bottles. Mirrors cracked for no reason. The town prayed louder, slept less, and when they passed the estate, they could swear they heard scratching from above. A week later, a servant boy fled the mansion, crying and trembling. He claimed he saw Arabella through the attic keyhole, but she wasn't alone. She was whispering to someone, he said. But no one was there. And something whispered back. Would you like the next part to show Arabella's final ritual and how she bound the rose in the portrait, or explore the townspeople's fate in the decades after her death? Absolutely. Here's the next part of the prequel, focusing on Arabella's final ritual, the night she sealed the darkness. The Cursed Portrait in the Attic, Origins, the Binding of the Rose. In the final 3 days of her life, Arabella no longer cried. She no longer screamed at the locked attic door or pleaded with the servants who slid her stale bread beneath it. Something had changed. A stillness had settled over her like snowfall. She had remembered the name, the Rose. It had haunted her family for centuries, its influence buried in journals, misfortunes, whispers between the lines. The Rose was not a demon of fire or claw, but of memory, legacy, and guilt. It latched onto bloodlines and twisted history so the truth became weaponized, forgotten, erased. It had whispered to Jonas in his youth, when ambition blinded him. It had fed on the town's fear. It had waited. But Arabella saw it. She felt its presence behind the mirror, watching her through reflections. She saw its outline in the corners of rooms that shouldn't hold shadows. And she knew, if she died cursing Jonas, the cycle would go on. So instead, she made a choice. She gathered what little she had, ashes from candle stubs, hair from her own head, bits of rusted iron from a splintered nail, and she painted. The portrait was her final act, a trap disguised as testimony. She painted herself not as she was, but as the Rose saw her, powerful, grieving, unyielding. She embedded sigils in the brushstrokes, ancient marks that lured watchers in, then held them, and around her image, she painted the name the rose again and again, in letters so small they blurred into texture. The final ingredient was blood, her own, from a shallow cut across her palm. At exactly 3:17 a.m., when the veil was thin and the house still, she lit a single candle and stood before the portrait. And she spoke to the rose directly. "You are no longer hidden," she said, "you are no longer free, you will remain where I place you, in this face, in these eyes, in this house." A wind howled through the attic. Though no windows were open, the flame danced blue. Something unseen pressed against the walls, but Arabella kept chanting, louder, stronger, until the air snapped like ice and the shadows recoiled into the canvas. The candle went out, and she fell dead before the painting, eyes open, lips stained with crimson, a faint smile on her face. The next morning, when Jonas unlocked the attic to retrieve her body, he found the portrait still wet with paint and her corpse sitting upright, staring at it. He left the room, locked the door, and never spoke her name again. But the house remembered. And so did the thing behind the paint. Would you like the final part of the prequel, where Jonas begins to suffer and Elderbrook slowly decays under the shadow of the bound the rose? Certainly. Here's the next part of the story. A Hawthorne Estate visitor's guide styled as if the estate were still being presented to the public, though there are always hidden dangers beneath the surface. Hawthorne Estate Visitor's Guide. Welcome to Hawthorne Estate, where history lives and lingers. Thank you for visiting Hawthorne Estate. We are pleased to offer a glimpse into the rich history of one of Elderbrook's most iconic landmarks. Below, you'll find a carefully curated tour guide, designed to provide you with an insightful and, we hope, safe journey through the estate's legendary halls. Please read carefully, some areas are off limits to the public. 1. Main Hall. A breathtaking example of 18th century craftsmanship. The main hall offers grand views of the surrounding estate. Here, you can admire antique furniture, original paintings, and tapestries that tell the story of the Hawthorne family. Please note, we recommend staying in groups, as the hall is known for its peculiar acoustics. Sometimes, sounds of movement can be heard when no one is present. 2. The library. A treasure trove of rare books, many of which were once part of Arabella Hawthorne's personal collection. Local legends say that if you touch the pages of certain books, you may feel a sudden chill or even hear faint whispers. These whispers are often attributed to the long-lost Hawthorne Chronicles, a book series believed to have been lost in the family archives. But be cautious. Some visitors report feeling watched when near certain shelves. 3. The gardens. Gleaming pathways wind through Hawthorne Estate's once famous gardens. These gardens were designed to reflect the beauty and elegance of the Hawthorne lineage. However, we recommend avoiding the northwest corner of the gardens, where a sickly rosebush once grew. Arabella Hawthorne is said to have planted it as part of an ancient ritual, and many of the rose bushes here are descendants of that plant. A small percentage of visitors have reported seeing brief, fleeting figures among the flowers. 4. The attic. Not open to the public. This area of the house is restricted for your safety. Visitors are discouraged from attempting to access the attic, where, according to some accounts, strange phenomena occur. Some say the space holds the key to the estate's most tragic secrets. Once, it was said to be the site of a powerful ritual performed by Arabella Hawthorne, the youngest daughter of the Hawthorne family. Her final portrait, still hanging in the estate's core, has become an object of curiosity, but it is rumored that the portrait holds something much darker than just a picture. 5. The basement. The basement houses a series of old storage rooms and wine cellars. We recommend a guided tour through this area. The space itself is mostly safe but remains slightly damp, as some walls are known to weep at night. The cellar holds several antique barrels, once belonging to Jonas Hawthorne himself. Be cautious when near the farthest back corner. Occasionally, old bottles can be found with strange markings, and some visitors have reported hearing faint cries if they linger too long. 6. The portrait room. One of the most striking features of the estate. This room contains a collection of family portraits dating back over 200 years. The centerpiece is, of course, Arabella Hawthorne's portrait. Renowned for its striking realism and haunting beauty, we advise taking a moment to observe the portrait, but please do not touch the frame. The painting was recently restored but is believed to be imbued with an ancient presence. Many claim they have felt a chill when near the painting, or even seen their reflection distort in the glass. We recommend not standing in front of the portrait for too long, as it is said to evoke unsettling dreams. 7. The haunted rooms. While we strive to maintain a welcoming environment, some rooms in the estate remain off-limits. These are the rooms that tend to cause disturbances, flickering lights, shadows that don't quite match their surroundings, and, according to some reports, the sound of footsteps following behind you when no one is there. The most famous of these rooms is the East Wing, where Arabella's final hours are believed to have passed. Be warned, this area is not recommended for the faint of heart. Important notes for visitors. The estate is open from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. daily. After 6 p.m., the estate will be closed to the public. Please ensure you depart before sunset. Flash photography is prohibited in certain rooms. We recommend using natural lighting and limiting your exposure time to the portrait room. If you begin to feel unwell, dizzy, or uncomfortable, we urge you to leave immediately. While the estate remains largely a beautiful place to explore, its history carries a weight not easily shaken. Visitor's recommendation. For those brave enough to delve deeper into the family's history, we suggest visiting the local museum in Elderbrook, which offers further details on the Hawthorne family's rise and fall. For more information about the portrait's restoration and Arabella's tragic fate, feel free to ask the guide at the museum. And remember, don't ask too many questions. Sometimes, the answers are better left unknown. We hope you enjoy your visit. Thank you for visiting Hawthorne Estate, a place where history lives, but sometimes it doesn't stay buried. Would you like me to add further details to this guide or expand on the haunting experiences of the visitors? Or perhaps you have another direction in mind for the story? Certainly. Here is the final chapter of the prequel. The Cursed Portrait in the Attic, Origins, The Sins of Jonas. After Arabella's death, the Hawthorne house grew cold. Not just in temperature, but in presence. The laughter of servants faded. The chandeliers seemed to dim. The once vibrant estate began to rot from within, though the rot was invisible to the eye. Jonas refused to speak of the attic. He had the door nailed shut, then bricked over. The portrait was never removed. When questioned, he claimed Arabella had died of fever, but those closest to the estate whispered of a deeper illness, of doors that slammed themselves, of voices that echoed from behind walls, and of a woman's face seen in every mirror after midnight. Jonas tried to move on. He married, had children. But his legacy was already unraveling. His first son, Henry, was born still. The second child, Eleanor, survived, but never spoke a word in her life. By the time Jonas turned 50, his once firm grip on Elderbrook's politics had turned to paranoia. He believed people spied on him. He had all the mirrors in the estate covered, yet still claimed to see Arabella watching him from their backs. Then came the eyes. Hundreds of them, scrawled in chalk, etched into wallpaper, carved into Jonas's furniture by no human hand. Every morning, he would find new ones, sometimes blinking, sometimes weeping. He burned the rooms, painted over them. Still, they returned. He drank more, slept less. His journals from those years are wild and fragmented. She sealed it with her death. I can't reach her, but it reaches me. They think it was her curse, it was her shield. I killed the only one holding it back. There are eyes in my dreams, in my blood. It wants out. By the time Jonas died, aged 61, his face had aged 30 years beyond his body. His corpse was found curled in front of the attic wall, fingers bloodied from clawing at the bricks. His final words were carved into the floor with a knife. It sleeps in paint. Do not wake it. After his death, the Hawthorne family declined rapidly. The estate changed hands, always briefly. Strange accidents followed its owners. Fires, illness, madness. And behind every tragedy, behind every cracked mirror or shuttered window, was always the attic. Always the portrait. And always the eyes. Watching. Waiting. Thus ends the origin. Would you like a compiled version of the full saga, including the main story, the epilogue, and the prequel, formatted into a short novel or printable version? Great, let's now go beyond the prequel and main tale, into the aftermath. What happens generations later, when the house is long abandoned, but the portrait still hangs? The cursed portrait in the attic, legacy, what remains? The Hawthorne estate stood silent for decades. Nature crept in where memory faded, vines split brick, roots cracked the foundation, and trees whispered secrets no one living could hear. The townspeople called it cursed, of course, but over time, memory softened. It became a ghost story, a dare, a drunken detour for teenagers with flashlights. Then, in 2023, a developer bought the land. His name was Marcus Ellison, young, wealthy, skeptical, a man who believed all stories had a price, and that the Hawthorne legend could be repackaged as luxury, heritage housing. He called it history with marble countertops. He and his team began renovations in spring. They gutted the halls, tore down walls, rewired the house from the bones out, but when they tried to touch the attic, things went wrong. Nails bent, hammers shattered. One worker, a former Marine, claimed he heard whispers behind the drywall, a voice saying his name in a tone no human throat could replicate. Then came the first accident. A scaffolding collapsed without reason, 2 workers hospitalized. Marcus, ever pragmatic, ordered the attic wall demolished. No more superstition. On May 3rd, the bricks came down. Behind them, untouched by time or mold, hung Arabella's portrait. Still vivid, still wet. The workers refused to stay past sunset. Marcus laughed until he touched the canvas. For the rest of the day, he didn't speak, he just stared. When asked if he was all right, he finally muttered, "She knows I don't belong here." That night, surveillance cameras picked up motion in the attic. Frames corrupted, sound distorted. In the video, someone, or something, stood facing the camera. Tall, too tall. Its face was dozens of faces, flickering through expressions too fast to follow. The next morning, Marcus was found sitting before the painting, eyes wide, lips sewn shut with black thread. No one knows how. He lived, but never spoke again. The project was abandoned. The estate, once again, was left to rot. And Arabella's portrait remained exactly where it had always been, at the heart of the house, at the edge of the veil, watching every trespasser who dared forget. Some stories don't end. They wait. Would you like a special Hawthorne Estate visitor's guide styled like a fictional tourist brochure, revealing secrets between the lines?